that's it. So let's get started. So why we conduct impact assessment? First of all the large NGOs conducted. That's I think what's very much is in the NGO world or third-party funded organizations. That's very much also along the lines which some of you wrote, is to measure the results and to see if the money was invested well. So that's I think is also a little bit along the lines what businesses would say, how the revenues are accumulated. They would review their practices. For the NGO world and the societal organization, it's to see if we do our work well, if we ask the money for right things, and if we then channel them into the right directions. We picked up a few organizations which are very much based on the impact assessment, and there are many more of them. And Transparency International is a relatively young organization, and they very much started from the impact assessment type of activities to see actually if the policies, especially I think Alyosha, you typed something about the policies, it's very much also indeed channeled towards policy making. And once you assess your impact, then you also see what impact it has on what kind of changes then to proceed with. And why impact assessment also for EYP or for the NGO world is, oh, actually, Marlene, I think, are we recording this? Yeah, okay, cool, just came to my mind. So why impact assessment? The first is it presents a heat map for change. So once you know what kind of impact you achieve, you also see where you are most impactful in terms of what kind of changes you make. And if you also see of the EYP globally or European level, it's of course, all of you enjoy being part of this program, but on a larger scale, we do make a cultural shift also in the societies by educating people, involving young people from different communities, and equipping them with the skills and knowledge to proceed and be active citizens to pursue our mission. So that indicates this map for the change. It then indicates resource planning. How do we best allocate, how we organize our activities, plan and invest, or in our way, just apply for what funds and how to spend the money on what kind of activities. It's similar to the heat map for changes, change interventions. Drives discussions with the stakeholders. It's very much to present to the funders the results of their work and the grants that they gave to us and trusted for us to achieve certain milestones. And that's overall the scale of the change we want to do. So Marlene will talk more about the results that we've had now, and that's to give you a specific example on this last point is also once we analyze, for example, participants' profile data and saw what kind of young people we reached, we could clearly identify gaps on what young people we don't reach with our activities. And that gives us more confidence to then know what kind of schools to go to or what kind of young people to establish dialogue with. And now I will pass on to you, Marlene, to talk a little bit about what and how.
Yes. So before I start talking about the technicalities of what exactly impact assessment is and how we use it within EYP, I'd just like to say that if at any point you have any questions, feel free to raise the hand in the Zoom chat function, and then we can stop and deal with the question right there and then, as it can get quite technical. It is data analysis after all. So don't be scared to ask if there is anything. But yes, so impact assessment is very simply, if you could go to the next slide, Anya, in the name, it says it's an assessment of the impact that we have. And an assessment basically, it means measuring the effectiveness of organizational activities and judging the significance of change brought about by those activities. So it's basically looking at if we do something, does that have an impact? Does it change something, or could we just as well not do it and life would be the exact same? And especially for EYP, there are two different kinds of impact assessment that are very interesting to look into. There is social impact and societal impact. And social and societal impact, they're very closely interlinked but the difference is kind of the level of impact that we're talking. So social impact very much talks about the impact that we have on individuals, the personal level of influence that could be directly or indirectly, whereas the societal impact, it is more on a societal level. So do we drive a change in society? But obviously, as if we have an impact on individuals, individuals make up society. So through social impact, we can also have an impact on the societal level. So in EYP, with the impact assessment that we do, we focus on both. We ask questions that are related both to individual impact and also more on societal level, and we see what we actually can do on a grander scale of things. So to go to the next slide, we are, as Anya mentioned, we are absolutely not the only ones who conduct impact assessment. Let me see. There we go. The European Commission, also they are very, very big on impact assessment. They do everything, all of the projects that they implement, they do some sort of impact assessment to consider whether it was worth doing it. And what they also do is that they do impact assessment before they put big projects into life. So what they often do is that when they have this big project, they do a test group first, and then they see, does this have any sort of impact? Are the participants' lives changed in any way? And if they get positive results based on that, then they put the entire grand scale project into life. There are a lot of different ways in which you can do impact assessment, and you can focus on a lot of different things. So for example, there are organizations that do environmental impact assessment. They look into what the environmental effect of any sort of activities are. But what we care mostly about here in EYP is active citizenship. We are a lot about active citizenship education. And so what we care about is, do we actually make a difference when it comes to active citizenship? Are our participants more active, more involved in society after they participate in one of our events? And what active citizenship is, whereas it's very much, it's this term that we like throwing around, but what it means is that people work towards betterment of one's community through participation to improve life for all members of the community. And that is very much what we would like to achieve with the EYP program, and that is also what we are looking into with the impact assessment that we do. So to get more into the how of it all, which is the big chunk of this, I would like to first ask if anybody is familiar with the impact assessment tab on the members platform. There is, if you could those of you who have actually been on the members platform, and there's no shame if you haven't, but if you've been there and you have seen the impact assessment page that Anya will show on the next slide, can you raise your hand? I see 2 hands. That is good, because we do actually have already on the member platform, Anya, can you change the slide? There we go. On the member platform, we have this page, which lists everything that we do with impact assessment within the network. And I can see that the link does not work, unfortunately. Oh, well, some technical difficulties, that's okay. But on the members platform, under materials and then impact assessment, you will be able to find all of the resources that I will be talking about here. You will find all of the survey designs and also all the results that we're going to get more into later. So how exactly do we do impact assessment? In EYP, impact assessment largely takes the form of surveys, and they are largely conducted in relation to the international sessions that we do. So generally, we do 3 international sessions a year, and for each of these international sessions, we have 3 different surveys that we send out to all of the participants, both the delegates and the officials. And they are sent out 2 to 3 months before the event, directly after the events, and then also 3 months after the event. And the way we do things is that these surveys, they contain quite a lot of questions, and also they are linked up to different aspects of the surveys, not just the impact assessment. So for example, the first survey that we send it out with the travel form for a session. So if you have been to an international session or a physical session, you're very used to this. We ask for your name, your details, we ask when you're arriving to the session. Then we also take this as an opportunity to ask more about other things. So we ask about your personal profile, where are you from, what kind of school do you go to, and then we ask something that's called a self-assessment questionnaire, which I will get more back to afterwards. Go back. And then directly after the event, we send this out together with the feedback on the event. So we ask, how did you feel about this session? How was the food? How were the venues? And then we also ask again about the self-assessment questionnaire. And then we ask them to evaluate outcomes. So for example, we ask them, how much did you feel like this session helped you get to know your committee topic? Or how much did you feel like this session taught you more about how EU bodies make their decisions? And then lastly, 3 months after the event, this is the only survey that only consists of one section, and that one section is the self-assessment questionnaire. Now, so whilst all of these 3 waves of surveys, as we refer to them, they have different content, they consist of different questions, but they have this one component that is the exact same over all 3 waves, and that is the self-assessment questionnaire, which we have an example of on the next slide. And the way these questions are made is that there are 12 of them in total. Here we just have an example of 5, but we ask all of the participants, so before, directly after, and 3 months after the session, to rank a set number of statements. And we ask them to rank it on a scale from 1 to 9. And for example, these could be on a scale from 1 to 9, how interested are you in political issues within your country? Or on a scale from 1 to 9, how important do you think it is to participate in elections as a way of participating in society? Or how motivated are you to address issues that affect those around you? And the reason why these are ranked on a scale from 1 to 9, and the reason why we ask the exact same questions 3 times, is that between the first time that we asked them and the last time that we asked them, first of all, it's been quite a lot of time. It's been maybe 4, 5, 6 months between the first time you were asked and the last time you were asked. And furthermore, there's been obviously the long-term commitment of participating in an international session between. So these are made so that we can track changes over time. So for example, people would rank themselves as a 5, and I think participating in elections is important before, but then after the session, they might have been convinced that, oh, actually it's more important than I thought. I'm now going to rank myself as a 7. And based on that, we can see whether participating in the session actually had a tangible impact on these aspects. Now, there is, of course, the question, and this was posed by Emilios before this workshop in the sign-up survey. Why do we consider international sessions to be a proper space to identify the impact of EYP? So if you could go to the next slide. And the question is, it's not the only proper space. The reason why we do them at the international sessions is that, first of all, we have participants from the entire network. And furthermore, they are very much the flagship events of our network, which means that it's a long time commitment. People put a lot of work in them, and we have a lot of resources for the sessions. And furthermore, we can also make the surveys mandatory, especially the travel form, which means that we have a large pool of respondents to get data from. However, the truth is it's also just a small portion of your peers that do actually take part in international sessions, right? And there is very much that issue that arises with self-selection, in that ISS only has like one particular group of people, and then if we only ask them for response at all times, is it really reflective of the entire network? And the truth is, we don't want these surveys, we don't want impact assessment to be something that is done only at the international sessions. The reason why we have all of our resources available on the members platform is that we want all of the NCs to also implement these after their sessions, after their events. And we want it so that we're able to gather data from the entire network, from all the different countries, and then create more of a holistic data gathering. Emilios, you have a question.
Hi, thank you. It's not exactly a question, it's more of a statement, I suppose. It's just that I agree with what you're saying about how, of course, international sessions they're not the only space that we could implement these things. but the impact assessment has been portrayed as the EYP impact assessment, which was the main reason for why I want to join here today as well. It's just that when we portray our entire impact upon these very limited events, which they're very specific events, not everyone can attend them, and the people who do attend them are usually the kind of people that, for example, I'm going to talk for EYP Cyprus, where it's my experience coming from. For example, most of our alumni that attend international sessions are alumni from private schools that they're being prepared in advance. Therefore, they have the opportunity to do that and to actually have that social impact. And therefore, it's a kind of a cycle, because I don't really like the word elite, but the elitism does apply on some instances, and I believe that this is one of them in some parts of international sessions. Therefore, when we portray the impact of the EYP, basically, I mean, yes, of course, that could be useful to portray to externals, but I feel that we're kind of lying to ourselves when we do that, because I mean, the estimation of 1 to 20 average is just thinking that every year every NC produces about 200 new alumni, and just considering that an IES has about 250 per year, so that's about 750. That's about one of 10 people even. So it's a very low number to be able to represent the EYP. I understand that this is the best that we have right now. It's just a point that I want to get across, that if we consider that good enough, basically, and although the resources are available, and thank you so much, guys, for actually having these things and just making us aware of these things. Maybe we'll hopefully use them in the future. For example, myself, I wasn't aware of this until just now. But yeah, I just think that the way we present this is very important as well, because if it was presented as impact of international sessions, that's perfectly reasonable and perfectly fine. But as it's presented as impact of the EYP, I feel that we're magnifying things that are not actually magnified. Such as, I remember percentage that was that 93%, I think, enjoyed their time in EYP, which I'm sure might be an equal percentage, but it might not, and something that we don't really know unless we investigate further into with more people, basically.
I think we could share our response, Merlin, on this, or I don't know, we could, that's also...
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I thank you, Emilius. I think it's really valid, and of course, it's also this for us being the first attempt to do it also makes us more aware of all of these things. I'm not sure, Marlene, if you have the profile data of the participants that were surveyed towards the end of the survey, but it's not entirely correct to say that it's mainly private schools participants, because the data showed that it's almost half-half, and that was also interesting because it was always an assumption that it's only private school participants that reach the IS level. It's not, and we now have the proven data for it. And of course, it's true that it might not be representative, and we would have the slide in the very end to see how we can get the NCs on board to collect the data on regional and national levels and then to analyze it all together. For the start, as Marlene mentioned, since it's the entire network present at these events, it actually makes it in a way more representative, because every single person from all the countries in the EYP is exposed to the same experience at the same time. So it makes it more level to ask them the questions. That's at least in our opinion. I don't know, Marlene, if you have anything to add there as well.
Of course, but we have to consider that these people are selected, though. It's not just it's the random person that might not actually be that interested in these affairs. We're choosing the top people basically from each national session, the people that we know that are interested in this, and then we put them in a pool and ask them these questions.
That's correct. That's very biased questions and answers in a way. But Marlene, I'm sure you have something to add.
Yes, I think, yeah, you do make a very good point. And I think that's also why, for example, we are hosting this workshop now, because we have realized that although we do get a lot of very valuable data from the IS impact assessments, there is a lot more data to be gathered. And as I mentioned, for example, there is self-selection, there is a certain type of people who end up going to ISs. And that's why we're also now looking into changing the way we do impact assessment, which I will present later. And then I will also now talk a bit about the results that we got from the report. And then to answer your question, Alyosha, as well, I have some data on the response rates on them, because that is also something that's very interesting to look at. and something that we are very much looking into changing. So if you could go to the next slide, Anya. What we did with the data that we got from the international sessions of 2018 and 19, so that's from Vilnius and all the way through Hamburg, we gathered all of the responses. And then we teamed up with data analysts from the company CorrelAid, and we created this European Youth Parliament report. And then we asked them to take all the data that we got, and they analyzed it based on the EYP experience. So like, how did they rate their participation in the session? How did their attitudes change? Were there any changes in attitudes? What was the quality of the events? Did they feel like they improved any skills? For example, teamwork or English, did they feel like the session helped them with it? And then we also asked for socio-demographic insights. So now we just have 3 slides on some of the results. So first of all, the first slide, people were just asked to say what made the most impression of you during the session, or sum up your session experience with 1 sentence. And as you can see here, amazing and people are one of the top words, which is very, very good to hear. It seems that people are really, really enjoying their time, and all the other data that we got as well indicates that our international sessions are actually quite successful in the goals that we have set for ourselves. But what's more interesting is on the second slide, which is we asked about improvement skills. Now, I realize that this is very small, but the entire report is available on the members platform. So if you're interested in any of the details here, you can find it there and then zoom in as much as you need. But basically, we asked the participants about whether the session taught them any skills. And what we did here, this is not the same as a self-assessment where we asked them the same set of questions 3 times. This was asked only directly after the session, and we asked them, did this session help you? Did this session teach you anything? And it was ranked on a scale from 1 to 5. And as you can see, almost everything from committee work is ranked above 5, no, above 4, I mean. And that means that in their own eyes, there is very much an effect. Also the culture program, we have nothing that is ranked below 3, which is very positive. And that obviously raises the question of, are our questions too positively skewed? Are we forcing people to give positive responses? Or as you said, Emilios, do we only have respondents that already are super positive to EYP and therefore will only give positive results? And that is something that we are now reflecting on, and we are now looking into changing the way we ask the questions. And then to go to the next slide, we have the summary of the means of self-assessment. Now, as you can see here, we only have 2 data sets. We have all of the responses from before the event, and we have all of the responses from after the event. Now, before the event, because the travel form is mandatory for all of the IS participants, we had almost 1,400 respondents across 5 sessions. After the event, we had only 600, and 3 months after the event, we had 250. And so the reason why we did not include the 3rd wave is that we had such a high dropout of respondents that we didn't feel it was fair or representative to include it and be able to compare it to a data set that had almost 7 times as many respondents. And so, yes, whereas it is 99% response rate, the first time around, it generally drops to about 50% after the session. But still, we're able to see improvement in almost all of the skills. So for example, especially with host country, we can see there is a clear difference in how people rank themselves before they participated in a session and how they did it after. And also, especially with whether people are motivated to address issues, we can see a clear difference. That's the 3rd point on how they rank themselves before and how they rank themselves after the session. So yeah, as I said, all these plots are available on the members platform. And we also got a lot of other data that we were able to extract from the responses themselves. For example, that 90.3% of respondents felt that their participation increased their willingness to get involved in society and politics. And just to be very transparent on how we've done these calculations, this is a question that was ranked on a scale from 1 to 9, and then they were coded as having feeling like the session had some sort of impact if it was 6, 7, 8, or 9. And if it was on a scale from 1 to 5, if they were coded as positively being affected, if they were put as 4 or 5. And then we can also see that 99.1% of participants felt that after their international session, they were motivated to address issues, which is almost too good to be true. It's almost 100%. It's quite fantastic. And then also that 97.5% think that participating in election is an important way of contributing to society. We also gathered some data on our outreach groups. And then here are just some, there are more in the report on the members platform, but we can see that 58% were identified as female and 42% as male, that 12.3% identify themselves as belonging to a minority group, and that 29.4% do not come from a big city. And this is especially important for us to know, because in our strategy, both in the past one and the one that we are now entering into in 2021, we have a lot of focus on our outreach groups. For now, we have 4 groups that we are especially targeting, and we really want to see, with this data, we're able to see, are we reaching these people? Do they, for example, do they get involved in EYP in the first place, and do they make it to the international level? We can see here, to a certain extent, we do, but definitely we do have a long way to go. And it's for this reason it is so important for us to get these numbers, so that now, for example, that we are implementing a new strategy cycle, we can reflect on how it's been in the past, and we can particularly pinpoint in what areas do we need to improve, which outreach groups are we not reaching as much, and how can we go about changing that? How can we make our impact greater? Yes, why the gender imbalance? Generally, this seems to be reflective of EYP in general. There is a slight majority of women or girls in the EYP network. As to why, I don't know if, Anya, do we have an hypothesis why this is?
No.
No. Simple answer, we don't really know why. But this is not just at IS level. We see that generally with participants in the network, we tend to have a bit more female participation.
I think what was, Emilia, so you also have something to add, but before I give it to you, what we've also noticed, it varies greatly through the countries, and some countries definitely see even more women than others, because it's maybe perceived as more volunteer work, and it's a bit about societal manners and distribution of roles. At the same time, in some other countries, when it's more stronger on debate club and politics and more of this kind of images that EYP creates, then we also more often see men involved. Emilius, do you want to add?
Sure. Can I add that before Emilius does this? Do you know if it breaks down by like officials or higher levels? Are there more women in other roles? Or?
So as for the, because when we gathered the data for this report, at least we didn't aggregate it or disaggregate it between officials and delegates. I know there has been some research done on this, whether that was reflected in the officials' roles. Not necessarily, I don't think that was by the authors, but it had been looked into. And yeah, I don't know if say anything more about that.
Yeah, Emilius, maybe you would like, but yeah, Alyosha, we don't have the data on it, but I know that it's been gathered, so maybe it's a good reminder for us also to look into it.
Sorry, Anya, I lost you for a second. Could you ask me again? Could you ask me the question again, please?
No, you just had your hand raised. So if you wanted to add anything.
I'm sorry. It was there from before. I'm really sorry.
Okay. Okay, good. No, but Alyosha, you've heard. So let's see. We will look into it again. Marlene, should I go?
Not just on that, but I'm just wondering also. So these were separate. Do we have the data separately for delegates and officials? Including for like minority and city.
Yes, they exist separately.
Okay. For that would be great.
The report themselves, they were combined.
They were yeah.
But they exist separately. Yes. Yes. Okay. Then we can go to the next slide, which is, I think I've talked some about it whilst we were going, but obviously there are a lot of challenges to implementation, especially the response rate. We see a lot of people simply do not bother responding to the second wave, and then when the third wave of surveys comes around, they simply don't send it back, which means that it's very difficult for us to actually look into that long-term impact, because when the pool of respondents is so small compared to our original pool of respondents, the comparison isn't really reliable, and we can't really draw any conclusions based on that. Furthermore, we see, especially with the response rate as well, there is self-selection. So we tend to see that those who do respond to the third wave surveys are either those who had an amazing time and they really, really want to tell us how much of a good time they had, or it's those who didn't have a good time at all and that they really want to tell us how much of a good time they did not have. So that is definitely a challenge. And furthermore, there is the question of use of indicators, because one of the questions that we ask, for example, in the self-assessment survey, we ask people, do you identify with the statement, I am an active citizen? Now, people understand active citizenship in very different ways. And even if we give them a specific definition of the term that we always use, of course, people always have different ways of looking into it. So instead, what we're doing now, we're looking into ways of using indicators. Instead of directly asking the participants, we're basing it upon indicators. But then the question is, of course, what indicators do we use? And how can we phrase our questions so that they are not positively skewed, but that people respond in an objective manner? Let me see a question. Alyosha, perhaps you could say, did you vote in the last? Yeah, exactly. So that is an example of, instead of asking, do you think it's important to vote, we can ask, if you are able, did you vote in the last election? And that is an example of using indicators instead of using actual directly targeted questions. Yes, so before we move on, are there any questions so far on the international session surveys or the impact assessment that we do in relation to that?
I would like to ask, do you guys feel that the results are positively skewed at times? Because we had some good rates. It's just you obviously can't know. It's just since you guys have been the one most closely to the data, just in your opinion.
You mean whether I think the questions are positively skewed?
Yeah, whether people actually respond to the questions in a positive manner because it's a questionnaire about the EYP, and for example, especially about the 3 months later question, I would say that when you ask someone, have you been a more active citizen after you attended this event? Do you feel that these rates are actually higher than they should be? I mean, this is a very subjective question that I'm asking, of course. Mm-hmm. I'm just asking for your opinions.
Yeah, of course. I think definitely some of the questions have been very positively skewed. But I would also like to just explain a bit further the difference that when we talk about the self-assessment, we don't, because this is the questions that are the same through all 3 waves of surveys, we don't ask anything about the session at all. There we simply ask about their attitudes and what they do in their daily life, basically, if they feel inspired to help people around them. Whereas in the survey directly after the session, that's when we ask, did this session help you? Did this session do anything for you? But yeah, definitely, I think that's also why now we have decided, based upon this report that we got and based on the questions that we've been seeing, we have decided that we're going to change, and we're also going to present that change to you now in just a little bit. So yes, any other questions before we move on?
I'm not sure, Marlene, if you're talking later about the 3 months survey, but that's also, I think, is just a good point that most likely we will not go on with this methodology because we were advised by the data analysts, and also we saw it now in the results that those are the least reliable results we could have gotten. Also because the percentage of people filling it in is just significantly lower, so it's not comparable. And since we don't often have a proxy to track people, because of course it's all anonymous, so it's also then it's just not a reliable data, and it's something that we will probably not pursue in the next setup.
Could I ask on the proxy thing, so like to identify, so we don't have a way to identify across, can we identify it within the survey? So was there an attempt in the data to analyze like gender and correlate that with responses, for example, or any other of those identifiers?
We haven't done much of it. That was an intention. And of course, there was a bit of a proxy on the committees and seeing how like each committee member responded and trying to correlate. but that was, we will have to rethink it a little bit. And we definitely didn't do a lot of correlations between, let's say, how do people from smaller towns respond to these sessions in comparison to bigger towns? Is there a difference in how? We haven't done that.
Is it tech? So, but is it's technically possible right now, or are each of the questions anonymized, or is it like one response and we could, like,
Yeah.
we can do it?
So what we can do, we cannot track respondents across the different ways to survey, but each response is, it's like a questionnaire.
Kept separately. Okay.
Yes. So we have the questionnaire, we have respondent 253, and then we have all of their responses for that survey. Yes. Okay. Moving on, the IS impact assessment, this one is not the only one that we've been working on in the past few months. We also got a final report that was commissioned by our partner, the Mercator Foundation. And what's very interesting with this survey, it was also based on an international session. It was conducted during Hamburg in 2019. But it was by an external evaluator, and furthermore, it was a qualitative survey. So they were sent out questionnaires here as well. So that's more quantitative data, but more than that, the researcher conducted 50 approximately interviews with delegates, with officials, and also with alumni, because there was an alumni reunion at the same session. And so the person, he talked to the alumni to see on a long, grand scale of things, 10, 20 years after, how do you feel that EYP impacted your life? And what was very interesting and good to see for us, because obviously the IS surveys is something that we conduct internally, but because this was an external report and the results were just as positive as for the IS evaluations, it very much confirmed our beliefs that we do indeed have a very positive effect on our participants. Anya, if you could go to the next slide, we have a few examples of the way that, or the outcomes of this evaluation, because they're quite different. He asked quite different questions, and it focused a lot on how and why people are in, why are they in EYP, and what do they feel about volunteering in society in general. And what the evaluator found is that compared to a lot of other organizations, the members of EYP are very conscious of the needs of those around them, the needs that don't just affect themselves, but those in their communities and their surroundings, and that there is no split between those who are involved in EYP for reasons of wanting to help other people and those who are there for their own reasons. There is very much an overlap, and that it doesn't need to be a split between people who do it for selfish reasons, and those who do it for selfless reasons. So people are there for both. They're there for themselves, and they're also there for other people. And yes.
And so, I think for this survey, was not entirely reflected in the evaluation, but that's of course much more qualitative. So it was very much based on the interviews, and a lot of, because at the same time during the session the alumni reunion took place. So that was the biggest advantage of this evaluation, because then alumni who stopped doing EYP 5, 10, 15, in some cases 20 years ago, were asked the same set of questions, and they were all also continuously giving positive answers, which is again slightly biased because they are also the alumni who traveled to arrive to this alumni reunion, but still on the research level methodology that was positively evaluated by this person. Yeah, questions?
Questions, yes. No? Okay, then yes.
Alyosha.
Go for it.
No, I don't want to talk. Please keep going, and then I'll talk at the end.
Okay.
No, it's now the space to talk. Okay, fine.
Yes. So what's happening now?
Great.
Yes, we're changing. It's been 2 years now that we've had these survey questions and this way of doing things. And considering the fact that we now got these two reports and the feedback that we got, and also the points that have been raised here tonight, we have decided that it's time to change, and we're going to implement a new way of doing impact assessment. So what this means in practice is that we're going to come up with new types of questions, or we're looking into new ways of new indicators. So rather than asking direct questions, we can base it on other things. we are getting input from existing frameworks, because as we mentioned in the beginning, impact assessment is something that is done in almost all organizations, and especially in NGOs that work with social work and social impact. And so there is a lot of resources for us to draw upon, and that is what we are currently looking into. And furthermore, we're looking into ways of creating a streamlined process that all NCs can adopt. Because even though the resources are already available on the members platform, we are looking into making it even easier, so that in the future we won't only have IS participants and IS respondents to rely upon, but we'll also have input from all the different national committees. So the ideal scenario would be that we at the international office would be able to gather information from the entire network and then compile results and reports based on this instead of just international sessions. So on the next slide, we have an example of what a new indicator could look like, for example. This is from the International Civic and Citizenship Education Study, which is conducted in 14 European countries every 5 years or so. And it's this massive survey where they ask a lot of questions, where they try to establish what sort of background the participants are coming from, but without actually asking what kind of background they have. And they do this through the use of indicators. So for example, this slide shows a lot of examples on how we can evaluate people's active citizenship and people's involvement in society without directly asking them. So for example, we can ask them, how comfortable do you feel discussing a newspaper article? And then we could ask that before and after the session. Is there any difference? Has the session had an impact on this? Or we could ask whether they would feel inclined to get involved directly in politics, or whether they would feel inclined to write a letter or an email to a newspaper. So there are lots of different ways that we can go about assessing our impact in more subtle and more indicative ways. And that is very much what we are looking into now. And what is very important for us moving forward is to also get the NCs on board. And why is that so important for us? Well, first of all, we really need that diverse data gathering. We need data sets that are representative of the entire network. And we do that because we want to have better tailored developments. And this is not just from an international perspective, but we would also like for the NCs to be able to gather data and then use that, for example, for NCs that have a goal to reach out to different demographic groups. It's important for the NCs to know who they're already reached. If there is no sort of gathering of that, then how will they know what to change or what strategies to implement? So that is also a very important aspect. It's not just at an international level that we really want to implement this, but it's also for the national level. And in order for this to be easier, we are also going to develop a data analysis toolkit. So whilst we are, of course, going to be sharing the surveys when they are done, we will also share a toolkit on how to best interpret them and how to use them. Because this data can also be used, for example, for fundraising. If we have very positive results, we can put them together in a report and show potential sponsor and see, look, we have an actual impact. Here is the very valid data that we can base it upon. It might help. Or also, again, for strategic developments and for development plans. So the proposed timeline for us, we're very much working on this now, is to have everything ready and good to be implemented by the spring of 2021.
Thank you, Merlin, and thanks everyone for listening. It's been some information mainly for us to share with you and to get also your input. So do you have any questions, reactions, ideas? Anything that comes to your mind, also maybe what was interesting piece of information that you've heard just now and you didn't know before?
I say something because I
Sure.
know how to on iPad raise a hand. So I think since we are now in the like internet area and we can make online surveys, so we can easily make a regression, and consequently we can calculate correlation between different factors. So the key points that now we have more possibilities than we have before, and what Anya mentioned before, that we didn't calculate correlation between factors that about big city and small. So my point is that now I think all these things are possible, but we just need a good data set, a large amount of people whom will put answers in this survey and like just calculate regression and analysis, make analysis for these all questions. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Can I please? So sorry for talking so much. First of all, it's because we were looking at this in the task force kind of at length. So I feel like this is a weird tool because it, from what I understand, it serves three different purposes. First of all, it's kind of a PR tool, right? Like we're using it for sponsorship. That's not a bad thing, right? But like we want to use this to track sponsors. Am I correct in understanding that that's one of the points of the data that we gather here?
I don't think it's entirely correct. It's also like, it's true that we need to present to the sponsors something why they give us the money and why it worked. And for example, Mercator, that's one of the funders, they even sends us their own evaluator, right? That we don't have access to in terms of choosing, but it's also for us in the EYP to know. And I think the participants profile data is very interesting. Yeah.
Sure, but that's one part of it for sure, right? Like going forward, we want to be able to use this tool to collect data that then we can give to sponsors and to prove that we're effective.
Let's put it this way. We are rather pushed by some, especially public funders, to collect not this data, but to prove that the program works. And in terms of the history of the impact assessment, the very first time we put it together was 15 years ago, when back then the Erasmus Plus program asked us to include a certain set of questions so that then we could show them how it worked out for the participants. And that's, in a way, it's helpful that they push us for this, because then we include it in our evaluations.
Yeah, that's very helpful to know. I just feel like that might be putting pressure on this tool to give like a certain type of outcome, right? To show about like the effectiveness of this on promoting active citizens. And then there's a second kind of feature, which is kind of what Yaroslav was just talking about. And it's also what Emilios' point was talking about, which is how much this is to shape, in order to shape strategies, policies. So for example, like to make a strategic plan like the GB did, we should ideally be basing it off of data. But the kind of data I think that we need for that pulls in a different direction from the kind of data that we would want to present to sponsors, is the point I'm making. Like that's a separate, you see what I mean? To make a strategy, you want to evaluate things in a way that you might not be as interested in if you're just trying to present.
Yes and no. First of all, usually the funders have no say in what questions we ask, so they don't give us any questions. Maybe it would have even been helpful if they did, because then we would have not broken our heads and phrasing them the way they should be. We also very often funders actually look into the events evaluations, and this data is like really sometimes it's very negative. Were the venues nice? No. Did you enjoy the food? No. So this is like, so in that sense, I personally don't have a feeling that we are very much pressured, but it's very true that we have this positive bias, but we are now definitely ready to address it so that we ask questions differently.
Sure. So but I'm trying to think like in what direction. Then because then I think there's a third kind of facet of the impact assessment, which is evaluative, like evaluating the session, giving us feedback, or even not on the session, but on like specific things of feedback. So one of the things, for example, that we were talking about in the group of maybe introducing would be, or like we might want to evaluate the safe core team as an example of like a practice. Maybe this would be the place to do it. Oh, did you experience something? If so, did you go to the safe core team? That's an example of a question that would help us evaluate the effectiveness of something specific. Yeah, and I guess what I'm saying, tell me.
If I could just jump in there. I mean, now that I've talked about these surveys at length, but I've only talked about a few of the questions that are actually included. So with the safe core team, for example, those questions are already there. And we also ask questions, for example, did you feel respected during the session? Did you feel that your opinion was respected? If you saw something, did you feel comfortable approaching the event safe person? And these are also things that obviously are only included in one of the surveys. It's the one directly after the session, so the evaluative one, but it's something that has already been there for a few years now.
Yeah, exactly. No, I really appreciate those. I think those are really, really important. I guess what I'm saying is I feel like those are different things. Like when we're asking, what we want for the sponsors, and then we want to ask also in the same survey, how is it for the safeguard team? And then we also want to make it representative. I personally feel like that's too much to try and do in one survey. So specifically, one thing I've been thinking about is in terms of the demographics. Emilius's point is just well warranted. Like this is a very specific subset of EYP participants. But I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily. It just means that this is not going to provide representative data. But data can still be very helpful if it's not representative. Like it's very important for us to know if people felt respected, regardless of whether or not it's representative.
But what would be representative?
Well, the last time I think there was a representative survey was in 2015. The CorrelAid also did a survey of that had individual responses from people around the network, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yes, but it's still, I think all of this, it depends how you look into the methodology. It also could be arguably skewed. We also had the survey, which was very representative in terms of the safeguard team 2 or 1 year ago. And of course, usually people who are most affected are answering this. But what I would like also to highlight for us, the EYP has proven as a successful project over the 30 years, right? And all of us who are part of this can say, oh, that had such a big impact on our lives. And we could say a lot of stories why and how. But then the project was not ever designed in terms of like what was said in the beginning, in terms of what kind of goals we have, how do we want to measure them. It's 30 years after we've been around, we are trying to actually set up some sort of questions, trying to prove in some sort of way why we have this impact, even though none of us would disagree that we have an impact on the societies. Regardless of how this data is now collected, we kind of would not I'm not sure if I'm making a lot of sense, but to you, Alyosha, see what I have as a point?
What I'm hearing you saying is that the point of this, which I think I'm understanding better now after this presentation, is the impact assessment is precisely that. It's proving the positive impact the EYP has, which is great. But I feel like there's two other facets that focusing on that aim kind of leaves out. Like if when we as when the GB wants to, or we as like the task force on anti-racism want to go and look at like these other, how inclusive something is, this tool isn't really designed to capture that. I feel like it's designed to prove the impact of EYP.
No, but I think it does design it because it actually shows that we are not very diverse yet. So if you look at the participants' profile questions, it shows exactly what is also the feelings that we have, that we are not yet diverse enough, right? So you could still see that it's more private schools and public schools, it's more big cities and small cities, it's more people who have parents with high degree, or they themselves would pursue the higher education.
Yeah, with respect, I feel like that's just like marred by the fact that it's ISs. And even if we were to go and do like nationals and everything else, like I just feel like these kind of surveys that are connected to sessions might just not be the right tools for that. Like,
okay.
Like you want an individual survey, or for example, like we do the census as well. That might be the right place to ask. So questions of being representative, I think, are really important. I would love to see that from the impact assessment, but the more I think about it, the more I feel like maybe this tool just can't cope with that. You know what I mean?
I see that, Lika, you have probably some sort of direct response. Lika, do you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of like small follow-up on what you said and what you, Alyosha, said regarding the impact and like how impactful itself it is to have this data from international sessions. But also what is important now, especially when we have this like a second circle, let's say, of the new strategy, is itself strategy evaluation. And maybe for the task force, it would be even more beneficial to, you know, explore this data within the strategy and like how within the network generally these trends were, you know, like impacted, if we did see the impact we wanted to see, or we had like quite obvious pitfalls, let's say, in certain areas. So I would say that these two things, let's say IS impact assessments, and then let's say strategy evaluation itself, can like be interconnected in a way, and we can use all this information in certain purpose, for the certain purpose, and these are kind of intercomplementary in a way, because they are really in line in a lot of ways, especially if we talk about inclusion and outreach and the things that are really falling in the strategy and really are highlighted or less highlighted during the events, let's say. So I would say this correlation and is like really huge, and we would maybe also kind of try to streamline those two and see what is a bigger picture here, and that would be very interesting. That's also kind of my reflection from the workshop. That is just really great. Yeah,
that's true. And I think also actually we like, this is the first sort of time we are like systematically reflecting it. I'm sure we will improve. I think it's essential to get national committees on board and to get national committees collect this data on national regional level. That would definitely benefit everyone, also for the national committees to know whom they reach. I think that we should continue evaluating our events just so that we know how they work. Ideally, it should be a streamlined process, and let's say it's fewer questions, everyone asks the same, and we have data set. We also should, like now we've done the survey for the 2 years. It's also okay now to collect more data for another 1-2 years and then to analyze. I don't think impact assessment has to be done every year. That's also not advised. And of course, I think it's two main points here. We should see also whom we reach on the very entry level and who stays to the last level, right? That's what the surveys don't capture now at all, or we can't understand why certain people stay and why not. It's also a natural selection. I think it's fine that some people are more interested than others. And second is this long-term impact. What we've now seen with our alumni association and how we are building it up, that the impact that EYP has on lives of these people who go on to many sessions, it's like forever lasting. Like we saw people now who are in their 50s and they took part in the EYP 30 years ago, and they have the same EYP spirit, the same mindset, the same values. They stand up for the same causes that people who just joined and are 17 years old are. And I think this impact is also not entirely captured, because that's the impact of the program at large. And that, of course, has to be evaluated with these different tools, so that you almost track one person throughout the years and then see how it created impact.
I know, Laura, you wanted to ask a question?
Yeah, sorry, I was not able to raise my hand, so I wrote to Marlene. Somehow it doesn't allow me to raise my hand. Yeah, so maybe my question relates a little bit to what you just said, Anya. I was wondering about the times or why you decided to just look at it before and after a session, in the sense that I think the 3 months, obviously the response rate drops, but in essence, it's interesting, right? To see whether actually the practice also changes. And if you only do it right before and right after, then it's maybe the mindset that you can measure, but not so much. So, right, asking, for example, Alyosha's idea of did you now vote, you cannot really capture after a session, I guess, because then not everyone had the opportunity to vote yet. So I don't know in how far you had a discussion on the decision when to ask the before and after, especially also because I feel that, as far as I understand EYP correctly, a lot of people participate for a longer time and have several.
For that, that's a very good question. And so I think that's also what along the lines of Alyosha. So what we do now, of course, it's just participants measurement. So it's in a way, it's not program measurement, and that's true. And the reason for that is that we evaluate the events, and that's just the easiest data and people for us to capture. Also, that's for the international sessions, it's what we manage on the officer side, and that's the largest pools of the most represented network-wide people. Maybe not backgrounds, I agree, but they don't have any other events in the network that brings the entire network together to experience EYP methodology. Because we have some training events, but they don't follow the same methodologies that kind of EYP usually tracks. So that's one reason. Second reason is that we usually ask them for travel details and everything. So that's the first entry they give, and then we always evaluate how the event went. So that's just easy. But we don't have, and I think that that's a different setup of a survey that we have to yet develop is, and that's what Ljoša was referring to this members survey that we had 5 years ago. That would be much more representative than to capture individual responses, ideally from people who took part in the EYP 5-10 years ago, and to evaluate. But ideally, again, the comparison data has to be available. So that's at least how I would also understand it, that we would ask still same set of people, some sort of questions, and then same people, same questions 5 years later. And this has not been done. I don't know, Laura, if it answers your question.
Yeah, I think partly, I mean, in essence, you're also doing two things at the same time, right? You're trying to measure both or evaluate the program, and then at the same time measure the impact. And I think these are two different aspects. I mean, we at Understanding Europe try to do the same, right? So I know your struggle, but I think that's because evaluating the program, whether you liked it, for example, whether you think you learned something, is something different than measuring impact as such, right? And I think that was the second part of what you tried to do with this.
Yeah, I think it's not, yeah, that's true. And I see, Marlene, that you also have something to add. I think it's a little bit accurate because we still at least evaluate impact of this particular event on this particular group of people. And now we saw that it was representative for all the sets of people from 5 sessions. So in that sense, we can claim that a format of international sessions is successful and has impact. And then we could have an assumption that most likely smaller events have the same impact on the same set of participants. But at large, it doesn't evaluate. I agree. Marlene, you wanted to add something?
No, I think you covered it very well. I mean, obviously, what we realized with because the third virus survey that we sent out 3 months after the session is the only questionnaire as such that doesn't involve any other aspects, right? The only thing we ask is a self-assessment questionnaire. But then what we realized is that even though that might in the end give us the most valuable results, people simply are not interested in responding, which is why we have such a high turnout rate directly before, because people need to give their travel details, and also directly after, because people want to feedback the session. They want to give their 2 cents on how it went, and then we can use that as an opportunity to also ask them these other questions. Whereas, I mean, we haven't tested this, but I would assume that if we were to scrap the evaluation part of it and only send the self-assessment and the evaluation of outcomes, most likely we would see the response rate drop even further than what we have it right now, which is obviously something that we are looking into, how we can separate the surveys but still have a response rate that allows us to draw at least tentative conclusions and then be able to draw assumptions based on that.
Could I go ahead? Maybe briefly, I also want to respect people's time, but I really liked Laura's and Lika's comments. So to me, it feels like, yes, there's 2 different things: evaluation of strategy / a program, and an impact assessment for the events, which also is events. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is I feel like we would be better, like at a high level, to maybe do those differently, like just come up with different ways to do each of those things.
Definitely. And that would be our big priority in this new strategy cycles that Lika said, and for us at the office to find the ways of how to do it. It's always easier to say than to do, but we're on a good track. The first steps have been done. I think since we did announce that it will last for 90 minutes, I would also now suggest that we have some wrap up, and maybe everyone who is still around and wants to say one thing that you found most interesting in this workshop and what you take away with you, that would be an interesting conclusion for us also to hear. Who wants to start? Lika, you want to start?
Okay, I will. Yeah, I mean, generally, I joined the kind of like the workshop because first of all, it's kind of course, always interesting for the GB as well as for the IO. What are the like NC perspectives and the individual perspectives, especially on the impact assessment? Because like you are the ones who we really want to like impact, and then the others, your peers and peer educators in a way. So that was like the kind of like really interesting to see these reflections. And the second is kind of like I really want to kind of see this bigger picture in terms of evaluation and impact and how we can like really streamline those two. And I kind of really wanted this for my portfolio as well, and for the GB to kind of further reflect on this, especially with the new strategy and how and like what are like the specific areas, because I went through the evaluation, the assessment itself, like the data and the numbers and like everything, and that's kind of like interesting what we can retrieve from that and like what we can highlight for the strategy. And that's kind of like conversation to definitely follow up from our side. And
thank you, Lika.
Let's see.
Yaroslav, do you want to say a few words?
Yes, thank you for you. Thank you for your presentation. It was interesting to hear about how the surveys work in the EYP. From my side, I think it will be good if in the future will be more analytics. Yes, because since I'm IT in business analytics bachelor degree, I will have this year. So for me, maybe I want more something corresponding to the analytics, but still I saw that you have something like analytics about gender, you have statistics about it, but in the future I think it will be very good if you have more deeper analysis of it. But I want, and I can say that this is a good analysis at this point, and we can make a different conclusion. And the first aim, which we had before, that we want to show for the people who are interested to invest in EYP, I think it is a very good information. Thank you.
Laura or Alyosha?
Yes, so thank you for the presentation. I think it's very interesting to see what other projects are working on, and especially I think it's also something that I'm currently looking into the indicators that you can use to actually measure things in a way that is not so obvious as to asking, are you now a more active citizen? Yes or no? And I think that's, I made some notes on what you said about it. And I think, yeah, that's exchange and see what you're coming up with and what we come up with. I think we could learn from each other.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Shall I just pass on to Alyosha?
First of all, thank you very much for having this presentation, for your work. I think it's really important and I really appreciate it. Second, oh, I forgot what the second point was. Oh, no, okay, well, I'll put them out of order. Tiny point that I didn't get to mention, which is just the minority question. I think that's a question that really needs to be revised. I think minority doesn't mean anything. It can mean everything from being a German in Belgium to being Black in Britain to being Turkish in Cyprus. I don't think that's helpful for us. Oh, I forgot what I was going to say. Anyway, just thanks. Oh, yeah, and I would love to follow up and as part of the other work as well, if you guys need want to touch base or something. I think Jonas might have reached out to you, Marlena.
Yes, we are having a meeting with the task force on this.
Cool. Thank you. I think what I took away with me is that there is some interest and that there is a lot of work to be done, but we're on a good track and we will really try to find the tools that work for everyone and make sense. Alyosha, definitely reach out, and if you have any ideas, even if it's a quick idea that scraps this question, just always message it to us. You don't have to spend much time phrasing it. We appreciate any input. And thank you very much, especially to Marlene here at the International Office for managing this process so well for us and for all of you for your interest in joining. If there is anyone without cameras who would like to say a couple of words, feel free. But otherwise, we would close this workshop and we will share the recording and the reminders afterwards. Maybe we will send you an evaluation form for this workshop, so feel free to fill it in. Cool, thank you. Okay.
Sorry, if I don't know if you already said it. Hi, I'm Katerina. I'm the VP of EYP Italy. I haven't been present for the first part of the webinar since I had an exam. I just popped in as soon as possible. So if I'm not mistaken, did you tell that the meeting was recorded, or was it? Okay, so amazing. So we can have the recordings as well.
Yes. Oh yeah, you will.
So, yeah. Okay, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you, Katerina, for joining. I hope your exam went well. And
I hope yes. I still don't know since it was written, but I tried to pop in as soon as possible.
Okay, that's very nice.
Okay, thanks a lot.
We'll send around some information as a follow-up to this workshop and another workshop we had on the digital sessions with all the information where you could find it on the member platform. But in the meantime, enjoy your evenings and
thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Lena, as well for joining. And yeah, we'll see you soon, hopefully. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.